Think Caligula was the craziest Roman emperor. Think again. Sure, the guy married his horse and declared himself a god, but Rome had an even wilder ruler, so shockingly bizarre, so catastrophically unhinged, that Caligula starts looking like a socially awkward intern. We're talking about Emperor Elagabalus. Don't worry if you've never heard of him. He ruled for just 4 years, and historians have spent the last 1,800 years trying to figure out if he was a misunderstood teenager or an ancient fever dream. Either way, what he did while wearing the imperial purple makes modern celebrity scandals look like middle school drama. And no, this isn't one of those, oh, he was eccentric because he liked art type of wild. This is full-blown sex cults, divine weddings, exploding food, and more costume changes than a Beyoncé world tour. So buckle up, because you're about to enter the Roman Empire's version of a glitter-drenched, gender-bending, religiously controversial fever dream, and yes, it ends in murder. Elagabalus wasn't even supposed to be emperor. He was a 14-year-old Syrian priest of a sun god nobody in Rome had ever heard of, kind of like if a teenage TikTok influencer from another country got handed the nuclear codes because his grandma said he had good vibes. His birth name, Varius Avitus Bassianus. Catchy, right? No? Well, neither did the Romans, so they renamed him after his god, elagabalus. Imagine naming a president Zeus and expecting things to stay normal. Now, you'd think Rome would have had a robust HR process for choosing emperors. Maybe a vote, maybe not appointing literal children. But no. Elagabalus got the job because his mom and grandma launched a military-backed PR campaign, told everyone he was the rightful heir, and the Roman legion said, sure, why not? We've killed for less. Within months, a teenage sun priest with no political experience was running the most powerful empire on earth, and he came to run it into the ground like a flaming chariot of chaos. Elagabalus showed up in Rome with a single goal: turn the empire into his own personal cult stage. And he didn't wait to ease people in. First, he made his god Elagabal, a Syrian sun deity represented by a big old black meteorite, the head of the Roman pantheon. Not, hey, let's add him to the mix. Nope. He went full divine takeover mode, demoted Jupiter, aka king of the Roman gods, and forced everyone to worship a rock that looked like it fell out of space and rolled through a costume shop. But that was just the opening act. He built a massive new temple called the elagabalus and personally paraded the sacred meteor around the city on a golden chariot, dressed in silk robes and golden makeup, while priests danced ahead of him banging drums like it was a rave that got out of hand at Burning Man. Romans were horrified. Not just because of the weird sun god stuff. Rome was used to weird gods. No, it was how he did it. The man turned religion into a full-blown Broadway production with incense, choreography, and more costume changes than a Las Vegas drag review. You think modern gender discourse is complicated? Elagabalus looked at binary gender and said, "That's cute." He didn't just cross-dress, he redefined the imperial wardrobe. He wore makeup, veils, gowns, and preferred to be addressed as a woman. He told people he had the soul of a woman and reportedly begged Roman doctors to perform gender-affirming surgery, yes, in the 3rd century. That's not a historical exaggeration. Ancient sources like Cassius Dio and the Historia Augusta say he offered large sums of money to anyone who could construct a vagina for him. And while most Roman emperors married once or twice, Elagabalus, at least 5 times, including a Vestal virgin, basically a sacred priestess sworn to eternal celibacy. Marrying her was like marrying a nun and setting the church on fire at the same time. It broke every religious law and caused a full-scale scandal. He also married a male charioteer named Heracles, whom he called his husband, and another named Zoticus, known for, let's say, physical endowments. Elagabalus was not hiding anything. He flaunted his relationships like ancient Roman tabloid covers. He didn't just push boundaries, he used them as red carpets for his wild lifestyle. You know how rich people today serve gold-covered steak? Elagabalus invented extra. He threw dinner parties where the food exploded literally. He'd fill pastries with live birds, dye all the meat unnatural colors, or stuff dishes with fake pearls. He once served a feast made entirely of animal tongues, just because someone said it was impossible. But the real kicker? He liked to mess with guests. He'd seat people on collapsing couches, serve fake food, or release wild animals into the dining room just to see who panicked first. It wasn't hospitality. It was psychological warfare with hors d'oeuvre. Some nights, he'd fill fountains with wine, because why not, and shower guests with flower petals until they couldn't breathe. It was like a dinner party hosted by Willy Wonka's evil twin. And that's not even the weirdest part of his social life. That's still coming. Now let's talk about politics. Because if you thought his love life was wild, wait until you hear how he treated the Roman Senate, the guys who technically helped run the empire. Spoiler, he treated them like background extras at one of his temple raves. Elagabalus didn't care about laws, or diplomacy, or taxes, or literally anything involving administration. He'd show up to Senate meetings wearing silk robes and eyeliner, sit on a throne higher than everyone else's, and then ignore every agenda item to talk about his new hairstyle or latest religious vision. Roman senators, the guys who had survived assassinations, civil wars, and literal knife fights in the Forum, were reduced to sitting through what was basically an Instagram live with an over-caffeinated influencer in a toga. And if anyone dared criticize him, they were exiled, executed, or reassigned to govern provinces, so remote they made Siberia look like a weekend retreat. One senator questioned his marriage to a Vestal virgin. He ended up mysteriously vanishing. Another tried to suggest that maybe worshipping a meteor wasn't ideal imperial policy. He died in a suspicious hunting accident. But Elagabalus wasn't content with just humiliating the Senate. Oh no, he had a much better idea. Let's talk about Elagabalus's Imperial Palace. Most Roman emperors used their palaces to conduct state business. Elagabalus used his to throw non-stop sex parties, host elaborate rituals, and allegedly run an actual brothel. Yeah, you heard that right. According to ancient sources, Elagabalus had a special room in the palace where he would dress as a prostitute and service noblemen and guards, taking payment like a regular working girl, not because he needed the money, but because he enjoyed the experience. He allegedly told friends, "It's not enough to be emperor, I must also be empress." And he meant it. He wasn't playing gender politics, he was melting them. He set up an imperial harem that included men, women, eunuchs, and possibly a few statues if the night got wild enough. He held divine weddings, where he would marry gods, animals, or ceremonial objects, sometimes all three. He once declared that his sun god was marrying a Roman goddess, then staged a full royal wedding, complete with flower girls, choirs, and naturally a giant feast where guests were served, dishes arranged in the shape of constellations. Elagabalus didn't just blur the line between religion and personal life. He tied that line into a bow, lit it on fire, and danced around it in gold high heels. Everything Elagabalus did was for attention. But not the normal kind, the "I want to be famous" kind. He wanted to be worshipped, remembered, adored, feared, and ideally all at once. He ran public contests to find the man with the largest genitals in Rome. He created awards for the most beautiful soldier and prettiest cook. He handed out golden coins during religious festivals that had his face on one side and the sun god's testicles on the other. That is not a joke. That happened. He had spies throughout the city not to report on threats, but to tell him what people were saying about his outfits. If TikTok had existed, he would have posted 12 times a day, all thirst traps, with captions like, "Sun priest vibes only." But even Rome has a breaking point. And Elagabalus was about to find it. So far, Elagabalus had offended the Senate, horrified the army, confused religious leaders, married half the city, and turned every sacred tradition into a musical number. The one group he couldn't afford to upset? The Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers who protected the emperor and also murdered them if things got weird. And things got very weird. The final straw? Elagabalus tried to name his dancing, teenage, possibly, also, a priest cousin, as heir, instead of the more conservative, boring, militarily popular Severus Alexander, his cousin too. The Praetorians weren't having it. One morning in 222 AD, they stormed the Imperial Palace. Elagabalus and his mother ran for safety, but the guards dragged them out, beat them to death, and threw their bodies into the Tiber River. No ceremony, no trial, just a silent vote of no confidence delivered with swords. Rome didn't just cancel him, they hard deleted his memory. His name was stripped from monuments, his portrait smashed, his reign scrubbed from official records like an embarrassing Instagram post. So, was he Rome's wildest emperor? Without question. Was he misunderstood? Maybe. Was he ahead of his time? Possibly. Was he a flaming glitter cannon of chaos in a city built on rules, conquest, and grudges? Absolutely. He ruled for just 4 years from age 14 to 18, and yet his legacy still freaks people out. Modern historians argue whether he was a proto-trans icon, a psychotic narcissist, a religious visionary, or all three wrapped in a silk gown riding a gold chariot. Either way, one thing's clear. Rome never saw him coming, and it definitely didn't survive him unchanged. If you thought Caligula was wild, just remember he never turned the palace into a brothel, married a sun rock, and tried to surgically switch teams. Elagabalus didn't break the rules. He didn't even acknowledge they existed. So Elagabalus gets murdered at 18, dumped into the Tiber like yesterday's wine-soaked trash, and everyone in Rome collectively goes, "What's elagabalus? Never heard of him." But history, unlike Roman senators, has a long memory, and the empire's attempt to delete him only made people more curious. Because if you need to erase someone that aggressively, you're basically putting up a giant neon sign that says, "This dude was too much." Fast forward to Roman historians. Cassius Dio, Herodian, and the writers of the Historia Augusta were obsessed. And not in a respectful, let's analyze this moment way. No. In a, this was the worst emperor ever, but here's 12 pages of wild stories just in case you were wondering what kind of food he poisoned guests with, kind of way. They called him a beast in human form, the filth of the earth, more prostitute than prince. Cassius Dio wrote entire paragraphs about Elagabalus's makeup routine. Imagine someone writing your obituary and spending half of it describing how you contoured your cheekbones. That's the level of hate-fueled detail we're talking about. But here's the twist. They couldn't look away. Even while trashing him, they wrote down everything. His lovers, his marriages, his weird temple orgies, his cosmetic preferences, his alleged quest to get bottom surgery from Roman medics who didn't even understand how kidneys worked. It's like the ancient version of hate watching reality TV and then live tweeting every moment. Here's where it gets complicated. A lot of what we know about Elagabalus comes from biased sources. Historians back then weren't exactly paragons of objectivity. They had axes to grind, political points to score, and zero fear of slander lawsuits. So, was Elagabalus really marrying male charioteers and demanding gender surgery? Or was this Rome's elite trying to demonize him with the most scandalous accusations they could invent? Historians today are split. Some think the ancient accounts are exaggerated beyond recognition. Others argue that even if 50% is myth, the other 50% still makes him the weirdest emperor in Roman history. Either way, the chaos of his reign wasn't invented. Rome really did reject him. His own grandmother may have ordered the hit. The Senate did erase him. And his successor, Severus Alexander, was marketed as the anti-elagabalus, calm, conservative, and boring as dry toast. So here's the plot twist that no ancient Roman saw coming. In modern times, Elagabalus has become something of an icon. Some LGBTQ+ historians and artists see him as one of the first historical figures to openly defy gender norms and live authentically, even if that authenticity included peacock feathers and ritual marriages to deities. In the 20th century, artists painted him as a tragic outsider, misunderstood by a rigid society. Writers like Antonin Artaud praised him as a mystical revolutionary. Queer scholars highlighted his refusal to conform to binary gender roles. Even in pop culture, he pops up as a kind of mythic queer legend, chaotic, dazzling, impossible to ignore. One part emperor, one part performance artist, one part living cautionary tale. And yeah, there's still debate. Was he a trans figure before we had that language? A power-drunk teen with no supervision? A product of a collapsing empire going full circus? Yes, all of the above. Okay, maybe not a ton of practical life tips. We're not recommending marriage to meteorites, chariot boyfriends, or surprise animal tongue banquets. But elagabalus shows us something wild about human nature, something that keeps happening over and over across history. When someone breaks every rule, they become unforgettable. He wasn't just a chaotic emperor, he was Rome's subconscious turned inside out. A reminder that beneath all the marble statues, senate speeches, and gladiator arenas, Rome was a place of fear, superstition, and barely contained madness. And maybe, just maybe, Elagabalus was the only one honest enough to live that chaos out loud. They tried to wipe him from the record. They tore down his temples. They burned his portraits. They made up wild stories to make sure nobody would ever respect him again. And yet, here we are, still talking about him, still obsessed, still stunned. Because Elagabalus wasn't just wild, he was Rome's glitter bomb. Dropped from the heavens, burned bright, terrified everyone, and vanished in a splash, but left behind a legend nobody could quite bury. So next time someone brings up Caligula, just smile and say, "But before we reveal who really wins the crown of chaos, tell us in the comments, who do you think was wilder, elagabalus or Caligula? Don't hold back." Sure, he was nuts. But have you heard of the emperor who tried to become a goddess, married a sunrock, and made the Senate attend drag shows before breakfast? Because Rome's wildest emperor wasn't who you think. It was the teenage sun priest in eyeliner who burned the whole empire down in silk slippers. And if you want more unhinged emperors, deranged kings, and forgotten chaos, hit that subscribe button. It only gets weirder from here.